Hi, everyone. We are about to start this webinar. We are going to wait one more minute just to make sure that everybody who is joining can join. So please bear with us for another minute and then we will get started. Thank you. Okay, great. Let's get started. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Alex Katz. I'm the Executive Director of the Environmental Defense Center. And today we're talking about marine protected areas. So thank you for joining this webinar, Marine Protected Areas, Protecting Our Underwater Parks. We are thrilled to have this time to talk about this important policy. MPAs are a beautiful network of underwater parks off of the California coast that are successfully protecting species, ecosystems, and resources, including in the Santa Barbara Channel, which, as we know, is one of the most biodiverse and ecologically important marine regions in the world. So, a couple of quick notes. There's should be a question and answer box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. If not, you can click on More, the More button at the bottom of your screen, and pull that up. We will be taking questions at the end of this presentation, and we'll take as many as we can. So please feel free to submit that. And with that, it is my honor to introduce Azsha Hudson, Marine Conservation Analyst and Program Manager for EDC. Azsha has a master's degree from Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and she has been working extremely hard on marine protected area petitions, on the two petitions that EDC has submitted along with our partners. So thank you again for attending. We look forward to your questions. And with that, I will hand it off to Azsha.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. I think it's no longer good morning, so happy lunchtime, everyone, and happy Monday. Thank you for using your lunchtime to join us and talking about California's marine protected areas. Ooh, let's see. Is this going to work? There we go. So to begin, just to orient us, I'm going to be discussing what was the catalyst for the MPA network, what are MPAs and how do they actually benefit our ocean and how do they not, the petition process to date, and then, of course, EDC's MPA petitions that will be discussed in the upcoming listening sessions that the entire Fish and Game Commission will be in Goleta actually for. So for the MPA network, what really started that desire for the work? Unfortunately, the start of it was with the decimation of the kelp forest, our fisheries. There was a collapse specifically with the rockfish fishery. The other impacts to of commercial fishing, climate change, ocean industrialization had a huge impact on our oceans in the early and mid 1900s that led to the creation of the Marine Life Protection Act. The Marine Life Protection Act was really a response where in the 1990s, people from all walks of life saw the alarm, sounded the alarm, responded to the alarm that the ocean was not doing well, and pushed the legislature to pass the Marine Life Protection Act, which is what created California's unique MPA network. And so that was a very intense process. It was a very long process, a lot of community engagement and conversations that happened. And we got 124 MPAs that range from in a level of protection, which I will get into a little bit later. So the MPA implementation went along the coast, starting in the south. There were some mistakes made in the South. The engagement of all community, especially tribal community, it was not meaningfully done. Um, Once we got up to the North Coast, that did happen in more of a meaningful way. However, there are still a lot of connection points that can be improved in this process. The MPA network was created based off of size and spacing guidelines that were created through a scientific working group that was to ensure the maximum connectivity, really showing if a species reproduces in the area through something called larval connectivity, that the MPAs are big enough and close enough to allow for those little babies to, go from zone to zone. So, like I said, there's MPA levels, there's different levels of them. But what are the impacts to the ocean right now? Pollution, that is a huge one. That should be fairly obvious to everyone. Marine traffic, harmful algal blooms. This area especially gets hit with those a lot. And then exploitation. That can look like fishing. That can also look like new endeavors like deep sea mining. That picture you see on the right. There have been some areas located in the Pacific that are potentially ideal candidates for that. So that is another issue that we need to be aware of in terms of exploitation and the harms to the ocean. We also have offshore wind development. While we need green energy, the implementation of that is still going to have an impact, no matter how much we're going to try to mitigate that impact. And so that is also something to consider. And of course, climate change was on the it's probably on everybody's top of the mind, but it's really affecting us in ways that have increased significantly in recent times. MPA MPAs are a general term, so marine protected area. The Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary could technically be a marine protected area. So when we're talking about California MPA network, the correct terms for the individual MPAs could be a state marine reserve, which is the highest level. That is the MPA that is not allowing any commercial, recreational, or science take. Take means fishing, really. So commercial fishing, recreational fishing, and scientific fishing to an extent is not allowed. Then you have under that the marine conservation areas. And those are kind of on a case by case basis, depending on which SMCA you're talking about, will have different regulations and different allowances. So one could allow commercial lobster fishing and highly migratory species take, while another one only allows hook and line take of nearshore species like groundfish. So it really kind of just depends. And then, of course, you have state marine parks and then state marine recreational management areas. Those are, to an extent, lesser on the hierarchy, and also not too applicable to the conversation today. So I am going to just kind of go over those. MPAs are successful. really, when you look through literature, based off of two things. The size and age of the MPA, how big is it? How protected is it? The higher the protection, the bigger it is, usually has better results. And then the management of that MPA. If we establish an MPA and then we don't have any technology or any enforcement, monitoring, and watching that area, and the community learns that no one's monitoring it, then those protections that are on paper don't actually see fruition. And so we don't want to have what that is, which is a paper park. We don't want to have paper parks in the water that aren't enforced, they aren't managed, they're not monitored. They really kind of just check a box, but don't really help with any conservation. So MPAs that are highly managed, highly enforced, usually do better than those that do not. What are potential benefits of MPAs? Increased resilience, specifically to climate change. That is a nuanced topic. When it comes to the California MPA network, you really have to split it up into bioregions. And so you have the South Coast, you have the Central Coast, and then you have the Northern Coast. And those have been categorized differently based off of the species assemblage. So what kind of fish are you seeing in the area? What kind of kelp are you seeing in the area? Even when you, especially when you're looking at the North Coast and the South Coast, the water temperature difference even has a huge factor into how those MPAs do and they do not do. And then even when you look at the type of pressure, the fishing pressure that happens in those areas, if you say to stop fishing in an area that has been heavily fished, those results will be much more significant than an area that wasn't heavily fished in the first place. They buffer the effects of climate change, so you see certain species will rebound faster that survived in the MPA than those that did outside of it. They protect nutrient cycles. Fish, we need their poop as maybe not as clean as we think it is. It is something we need. And so that is an essential portion of the nutrient cycling that happens. It restores overfished populations, of course, which goes back to the earlier one. We need more fish for more poop. It creates spillover effect. That is when you have, the MPA, think of it as a box, and you keep, the fish keep reproducing and reproducing and reproducing. And because they're homebodies, they don't move outside of that area very much, then the offspring kind of start falling out of that box, right? That is the spillover effect. And so you'll see a lot of the times fishing will fish the line of an MPA, so the boundary of an MPA, because of that particular effect. And then one of the major things is they protect ecosystems. MPAs are really beneficial for, we've identified a rocky reef or kelp habitat or eelgrass. That for whatever reason is being impacted. Let's put this MPA around it, and then that ecosystem can have time to flourish, and then you get all of these other following factors as well. Briefly, MPAs are not a quick fix. If you remember back to an earlier slide, one of the hallmarks for a good MPA is the size and age. Age does not mean 5 years in this case. It really means 20, 30 years, right? And so this is not a quick fix. This is something that they have to be in a space for a long time before we see the full benefits of the MPA. MPAs are not fishery management tools. They are a conservation tool that pairs very nicely with fisheries management. However, because MPAs are not specifically designed to protect one species, they are not a fisheries management tool, and they're not perfect. They are one tool in the toolbox for conservation. I always like to say if you want to hang up a picture, you're not necessarily going to get a jacksaw, right? Like different tools are for different things. And so that is one important consideration to remember when we talk about MPAs. To begin a little bit, so I gave you some why are we here, what do petitions do, and then to start to the ask of why we're here for this workshop. the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Fish and Game Commission are the agency and the commission that maintains and regulates the MPA I'm using a bunch of different words, apologies. The MPA network. And so the decadal management review is every 10 years. The first one happened in 2023. And we are slowly chugging along to get to the end point of the Fish and Game Commission making the decision on the petitions that the community has set forth. So the MPA network was established, and we actually didn't know if this was going to work, right? When you look at the Marine Life Protection Act, written in that is this is kind of a huge experiment. We don't know if this is going to work, so we need to design this so that if it doesn't do what we think it's going to do, it's at least going to help us learn something. And so they were very particular with how they wanted to review this, and it's the adaptive management cycle. So you plan, right? We make a plan of something, we implement the plan, we establish the MPA network, we monitor it for 10 years, and then we come back beginning of 2023 was the first comeback period to evaluate and see how is the network doing? What do we need to do to it to have it realign with our plans and objectives, or do we need to even maybe rethink that? In that review process, we've determined, the state has determined through their own different metrics that out of 124 MPAs in California, 90% are smaller than the scientific guidelines. And almost 70% are farther apart than the guidelines recommended. And so when we think about how well the network is doing, we also need to remember that it could be doing better potentially. It is not meeting the guidelines that have been set in place. And so, what do we need to do to make sure that they meet those? And then, from the new science that we have, with climate change and sea level rise and new exploitation like the deep sea mining, how are those going to impact and intermix with the MPA network? Through the decadal management review process, that 2023 date, we did have, not solutions, the conclusions in a way from the MPA network for those first 10 years. Bigger and more abundant fish and invertebrates are found in MPAs when compared to their reference sites. Spillover is something that occurs and enhances fisheries. So some fisheries do benefit, groundfish, spiny lobster, to name a few. And then larger MPAs perform better. No take MPAs, so the state marine reserves, the highest protected MPAs, perform the best. Detecting ecological benefits for some species and habitats will take more time. That's partially because the MPA network is not representative of all the habitats in the California coast, along the California coast. And then also some species, when we think of the species that really benefit from MPA establishment, those are kind of really the homebodies, but the highly migratory species. So think tuna, think swordfish, right? They're still benefited from MPAs. However, it's not as much as the homebodies. And then just getting all of that data on all of the species in our area will take more time. And then, like I hinted at, the trends varied across habitats and bioregions. So that was really that South Coast, Central Coast, North Coast split that we saw. So we're at the petition process. 2023, we got the decadal management review. Everybody took time to review it, and then in that came a few recommendations. The Fish and Game Commission put to the community. We have all of these recommendations spanning from improvements in education and outreach, on enforcement, and then on the adaptive management network process. And by and large, most of the community that was involved back in the late summer, early fall of 2023 wanted to petition for changes to the network. And so November 2023, we submitted those. There's 16 petitions seeking to expand or add new MPAs. And then there's three petitions seeking to weaken or remove MPAs. Here's a timeline of what I've kind of started explaining. So August 2023, we had the adaptive management process begin. November 2023, petitions were submitted. In between November 2023 and March 2025, a lot of us petitioners engaged in community outreach, right? Giving our petition to the community and saying, hey, tear it apart. What do you not like? What would you change to it? So then we can go to the Fish and Game Commission in March 2025 with amendments to our petitions. And so we are now coming up on the decision of it all. March of this year, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife submitted its recommendations to Fish and Game Commission. Unfortunately, on a lot of the conservation petitions, that was a deny from the CDFW. However, that is not the end all be all. The decision makers are the Fish and Game Commission, and the Ocean Protection Council will be releasing their own recommendations following the listening sessions. And those listening sessions, the first one is actually tomorrow for the North Coast. It will be in person and hybrid. Then there is the May 5th and 6th listening sessions for our area. That'll be in Goleta. You see this circle, no, that's an oval. The blue oval right up there, that is the address for where the May 5th and 6th listening sessions will be held. They will be starting at 8 a.m. And then hopefully by June 16th, the final decision on the petitions will be made by the full Fish and Game Commission. So these listening sessions are really just the public to go and say, you know, I support this petition because of X, Y, and Z, or I do not support this petition because A, B, and C. When we're engaging in these meetings, the Fish and Game Commission will be there. However, this is still technically a marine resource subcommittee meeting, and that's why no decision will actually be made at these listening sessions. We will have to wait until that June 16th meeting for a final decision. And even that is potentially, that is not, none of those dates are, or decisions are cemented yet. We have to wait and see. Let's get into the fun stuff. EDC's particular petitions. The spiny lobster up front is was chosen for a particular reason. Um, we have a petition for Anacapa Island. Hopefully you guys can see my mouse cursor. If not, I will try to also just give the description. So if you look at this map in the bottom right-hand corner, that is Anacapa Island. The blue rectangle is the State Marine Conservation Area. This is what EDC is petitioning for. The red kind of muted color rectangle is the State Marine Reserve that is adjacent to the SMCA. So the State Marine Reserve, the red area, is highly protected. So no commercial, recreational, or scientific take is allowed in that area. Um, in the early 2000s, there is a researcher named Jesse Alstat who conducted very specific research and replantation efforts in this area. So when you look at the map and you have that line of demarcation of the SMCA and SMR, and you go all the way down to Anacapa Island itself, at that point is Frenchie's Cove. Frenchie's Cove was traditionally the biggest eelgrass meadow, I believe, in California, if not the Channel Islands. Um, and it was decimated. It was destroyed by, I believe it was white urchin. And so there were some efforts to replant the area, to see if we can, have successful replantation methods and, see this meadow come back and continue to flourish. And so the eelgrass what has been was planted, has been monitored a few times throughout the last 2 decades. And one of the things that came out of that was lobster traps were harming the eelgrass. So what was happening was that the lobster traps sitting in that sandy sediment would be gouging into the sand, the sediment, through wave action and would uproot and destroy the eelgrass. And so you saw the effects of that on the SMCA side, and did not see that on the State Marine Reserve side. And I'll get to that data in a little bit. Real quick, some of the benefits of eelgrass. It is a very important food web, or a habitat that enables a complex food web. It helps filter nutrients, it improves water quality, it helps stabilize sediments, and it acts for as a refuge and nursery for many species. Um, and when we go back to the historical setting of Anacapa, the SMCA and the SMR, and even the rest of the Channel Islands, habitat protection, eelgrass protection was one of those big hallmarks flagged in those documents. Eelgrass protection has been flagged recently for by the Ocean Protection Council as one of those habitats that we really need to do a better job at identifying where they are and protecting what's left. And so here's another map. So as you can see, there is a few different shape files or polygons. You have the pink, you have the greenish yellow, and then you have the blue. So starting with the greenish yellow, that was the data from 2009. That eelgrass coverage was quite extensive on this state marine conservation area. And there was some on the state marine reserve side. For the 2012 data, the eelgrass on the state marine conservation area is still doing somewhat okay, a little bit smaller. However, once you go into the 2024 data, the eelgrass coverage is much smaller than it was originally on the SMCA side. However, it has extended much more on the state marine reserve side. Why do I bring that up? That is important because when we think of, well, what are the possible other impacts to the area, other than lobster traps that could be harming eelgrass? Um, from our knowledge and the research that Jesse Alstat has done, the really only obvious sign of impact to the eelgrass meadows from the transects that are in the water, the exploration that the team had done, lobster traps were that only reasonable explanation, or hard bottom items like anchors, which, dig into the sand, the sediment, and can do uprooting of its own. You could think, well, going back to like climate change or plastic pollution or marine traffic or any of those, could they have an impact on this area? And I would say yes. However, it would have, for the most part, an equal impact, right? This is a fairly small area. That it would not make logical sense to think that only climate change or warming waters are going to hit the state marine conservation area and not also have an equal impact to the state marine reserve side. So despite all of these macro impacts happening to the area, the eelgrass is still, for the most part, doing well, not doing as good as it probably was once, back in its heyday, but it's still expanding, right? From this green, yellow polygon to this blue polygon, it has expanded. Well, on the state marine conservation area, where trapping is allowed 2 months out of the year, this eelgrass has been decimated. And so that is the real argument behind our Anacapa petition is that we have direct evidence that these lobster traps are impacting eelgrass. And so we should change the regulations for that. The regulation change could be one of three or more. So we also welcome if you watching this and you decide to go to the May 6th meeting, please do. That if you hear an option that I don't list and you think it could be something that's viable and works, please present it to the Fish and Game Commission. What we're asking is we've found an issue. We have these options. One option is to change, to disallow, to stop commercial lobster trapping in the area. Another one is to change the gear type. So the type of fishing mechanism that is used for commercial lobster trappers, because that is the gear type that has that hard bottom. Or there's currently an existing boundary around Anacapa. If you look at this black line right here that says 30 meters in depth, that is an existing closure for brown pelicans that is most of the year, except I believe for November and December. Those 2 months allow lobster trapping to occur in that area. Outside of those 2 months, so the other 10 months, it's not allowed. Those 2 months of fishing pressure have, again, decimated the eelgrass coverage on the SMCA side. As you see this line right here, that's closest to the coast, that is a 10 meter depth. Further out is 30 meters and farthest out is 50 meters. So within that 30 meters, the eelgrass coverage is there, and there's traps that are allowed for 2 months out of the year that has led to the decimation of the eelgrass on the state marine conservation area side. And so that is one of EDC's petitions to the commission. We've identified eelgrass as being harmed by this lobster trapping occurring. Please change the regulations so we can better protect the eelgrass. And then, sorry, going back one more time, this green box right here, sign the petition to show your support. You can scan that QR code and we will handle the submissions of your comments. But we would also appreciate you going in person or hopping on Zoom and giving comment in support of Anacapa. The second petition would be the creation of an MPA. And so that would be called Mishopshno. That is for the Chumash village that was in the area. This map is a little bit hard to see, but if you can see that kind of tealish dot, that was where the Mishopshno was located. And so one of the reasons we are petitioning for the creation of this MPA would be for cultural resource protection, for the Santinez Band of Chumash Indians, for the Coastal Band, for Barbaño Ventrianos Band, for our First Nations in the area to have that ability to then co-manage, right? So on Mishopshno, we are joined by our co-sponsors, the Santinez Band of Chumash Indians, and then the National Resource Defense Council. And so this petition has gone through a few different iterations, but as it is now, you will see on this map the dashed lines. That was the original boundaries of Mishopshno. Again, we had multiple conversations, many conversations between that November 2023 submission and the March 2025 amendment process. And we had conversations with commercial fishermen, with recreational fishers, with spear divers, with shore-based folks, with subsistence, with the tribal groups and bands. And so we've shrunk the MPA to still fit within those sizing and spacing guidelines that were made by the scientific guidance community, guidance community. And then if you look at this really kind of like oval-ish green section that's kind of within the MPA, but then split by that red line, that is Carpinteria Reef. And so that is one of the habitats in the area that we want to protect. And Carpinteria Reef is utilized by spiny lobster. We got this from conversations we had with some fishers. And so us cutting the boundaries of our petition to be smaller, it excludes now this collection of kind of like elongated shapes. That's armpit reef. We were told through our conversations that the lobster would go from Carpinteria Reef and push out into deeper waters into armpit reef. And so that fishing of the line could happen by the commercial lobster fishers. So that was one change that we made. Another was that Carpinteria Reef, a third of it is left out for the spear fishers and free divers that are in the area to still be able to go to that area and fish. And then we also changed the allowances for shore-based fishing to allow hook and line, as we've spoken with our tribal partners, and then also being aware that this is a large subsistence fishing area. So folks who are fishing to put a protein on the plate at home for their families, we did not want to impact that, of course. And so hook and line was the main gear type used that we identified and is still akin to some of the traditional fishing techniques that may be used by some of our tribal partners. Again, there's the sign the public petition to show your support. And Ms. Shopshno will be spoken on at the May 5th meeting. So Ms. Shopshno is May 5th and a Kappa is May 6th, both at the same location, both starting at 8 a.m. And we would appreciate for folks to join, hop on, and give their comments in support of the MPA petition process. Any questions? I will, quick second.
Thank you, Asia. And we do have questions in the question and answer box. Asia, um, I can read some of those, or if you'd like to just read them and respond, either way.
Yes, I can read through them. So the first one that I'm seeing, how do you mitigate the impact of offshore wind development? In this case, I worry about perfect being the enemy of good. So how do we mitigate the impact of offshore wind development? Well, that is still currently a very fluid process, a very changing process. And so EDC, along with some of our other partners, are very involved with state agencies to an extent, federal, not so much currently, but really making sure that different new technologies are considered to be putting on the turbines or the platforms to watch for, birds and bats, things being put on the different cable lines to determine if there's additional tension on them to indicate whether there may be an animal trapped through entanglement. So there are conversations going on the mitigation of the potential harms of offshore wind. However, we are still in a very beginning stages, especially when we're talking about California for floating offshore wind, which is not fixed offshore wind. There's still a lot of conversations being had and that need to be had, but they are occurring. So, mitigation of impacts of offshore wind that's kind of known but unknown as well. Hopefully that is as good of an answer as I can give. Sorry. Um, I see from another question, your daughter lives in Fort Bragg. What do I know about the MPA there? Not much, but I can follow up with you if after I do some additional looky-looing, because that MPA does sound familiar. I just can't remember at this moment in time. So Alex, if you can mark down that person so I can reach out to them. Um, and then I see another one. Are you aware of why CDFW denied the conservation measures in the petitions? Um, I have my personal reasons. It seems that the CDFW has a difference of opinion in how the science reads, um, in how the petitions are in line with the goals and objectives of the Marine Life Protection Act. There's discrepancies in how adaptive management is being defined and enacted and put into practice. Um, it seems like there's a difference in the understanding of definitions of things. Um, yes, that's the answer I will stick with. Which three MPAs were recommended for removal and why? Great question. So in our area specifically, there were three MPAs, petitions. I believe two of them are at the Channel Islands. One is for a petition to allow for highly migratory species take. Saying that MPAs don't benefit highly migratory species. Therefore, they should be opened up to allow for fishers to go into the MPA and fish for them. So again, think swordfish, bluefin tuna, as some of the bigger ones. And so in a little bit of a pushback to that petition, to their own point, MPAs are not really designed specifically for highly migratory species, despite them benefiting from it. Um, Highly migratory species, they do just that. They're highly migratory, and so they will not be in the MPA area for a long time. And so there's nothing stopping fishers from being able to go through an MPA. It's just you can't take while you're in the MPA. So you could very well continue to follow that individual species that you're tracking until it's outside of the MPA. Another one is for urchins, for opening up petition MPAs to allow for urchin take. Their reasoning is to the purple urchin specifically have been destroying the kelp forest in our area or along the California coast. And so one idea that kind of happened a few years ago was to have people in the water culling, taking tiny hammers and going at it with the purple urchin. And the petition is using that reasoning that we need to allow for more purple urchin take, red urchin take to help with the kelp forest restoration efforts. Again, that one is a little bit more nuanced in that they're saying all urchin should be allowed for take. However, when you look at what is really decimating kelp forest, it's the purple urchin. And so that is a little bit of a which species do you mean? And do you want to target? Especially when you look at the landing data, red urchin is really the target species versus purple urchin. When you think of like a viable like market for this. And then also for EDC, any opening up of an MPA that has been highly protected, we view as weakening the network. And so therefore we do not support anything like that. And then there's another one that I'm currently forgetting. Apologies. I believe that one is more of a North Coast petition. So not necessarily going to be discussed at the May 5th and 6th meeting. That should be actually being talked about tomorrow. And I may be able to get one more question in. Um, what authority does the federal government have to change or lessen what we are doing and proposing? That's a good question. Most of these MPAs are in state waters, and they don't have a federal counterpart. So, to my understanding, there's not much the federal government can do. However, when we think of the Channel Islands MPAs, they do have a federal counterpart, right? So when we think of Anacapa, you have the state marine conservation area and state marine reserve, but you also have in deeper waters the federal marine conservation area and the federal marine reserve. So changing that could potentially mean that the federal side needs to be changed as well, especially if you're talking about boundary changes. And I think we are all aware of how difficult our federal agency, staff have had it in engaging with certain topics because of unfriendly leaning of the administration. And so I can't really give a concrete answer to that other than we expect that it would changing of specifically like the Channel Islands petitions or MPAs would possibly open up that Pandora's box of the federal agency or federal government getting involved. So we don't have anything concrete, but that is definitely something we have spoken about and considered. Um, and then just real quick, because this is a simple one, did you say there would be a Zoom link provided for the May 5th and 6th listening sessions? Yes, that is currently on the Fish and Game Commission website now. It's up under the meeting section for 2026. And then just scroll all the way down to May 5th and 6th, and then you should see all of the corresponding documents to help you get onto that. But also, my email is down below on this current slide. So if you still cannot find that, please reach out to me and I can help you. And then if you have any questions, because this was kind of a, fire hydrant and a lot of information, so please reach out as we engage. I believe that is 12:45. I don't want to go over people's time.
Well, thank you, Asia. That was really incredible. And thanks everyone for listening. And we're always happy to provide more information. Please reach out to us anytime. And thank you for your interest. The links for the petitions and for the Zoom link for the commission meetings that are coming up in May are all in the chat. And with that, we will end it here. Thank you.